Welcome back to the library, everyone. Today we have a very special guest. We have Benjamin. You say hi. Can you say hi? There's a little smile. You say hi. Anyway, Benjamin is here we're getting very close to the end of the book. So what just happened in the last chapter? Something really sad happened, right? Aslan, the witch, killed Aslan on the stone table, right? And who saw? Can anyone tell me who two people saw? Yep, Lucy and Susan. Very good. So they saw this happen, and it was very, very sad. And so now we're gonna see what happens next. I don't know what's gonna happen now that Aslan's gone. Chapter 15, Deeper Magic from Before the Dawn of Time. While the two girls still crouched in the bushes with their hands over their faces, they heard the voice of the witch calling out, "Now, follow me all, and we will set about what remains of this war. It will not take us long to crush the human vermin and the traitors, now that the great fool, the great cat, lies dead." At that moment, the children were for a few seconds in very great danger, for with wild cries and a noise of skirling pipes and shrill horns blowing, the whole of the rabble came sweeping off the hilltop and down the slope right past their hiding place. They felt them go by with a cold wind, and they felt the ground shake beneath them under their galloping feet. And overhead there went a flurry of foul wings and blackness of vultures and giant bats. At any other time they would have trembled with fear, but now the sadness and the shame and horror of Aslan's death filled their minds that they hardly thought of it. As soon as the wood was silent again, Susan and Lucy crept out into the open hilltop. The moon was getting low and the thin clouds were passing across her, but still they could see the shape of the great lion lying down in his bonds, and down they both knelt in the wet grass and kissed the passing across. The moon was getting low, and as soon as the wood was silent again, Susan and Lucy crept out into the open hill. The moon was getting low and thin clouds were passing across her, but still they could see the shape of the great lion lying dead in his bonds. And down they both knelt in the wet grass and kissed their cold face and stroked his beautiful fur, what was left of it, and cried until they could cry no more. And then they looked at each other and held each other's hands for mere loneliness and cried again, and then again were silent. At last Lucy said, "I can't bear the look of this horrible muzzle. I wonder, could we take it off?" So they tried, and after a lot of working at it, for their fingers were cold, and it was now the darkest part of the night, they succeeded. And when they saw his face without it, they burst out crying again, and kissed it, and fondled it, and wiped away the blood and the foam as well as they could. And it was all more lonely and hopeless and horrid than I know how to describe. "I wonder, could we untie him as well?" said Susan presently. But the enemies, out of pure spitefulness, had drawn the cord so tight that the girls could make nothing of the knots. I hope no one who reads this book has been quite as miserable as Susan and Lucy were that night. But if you have been, if you've been up all night and cried till you have no more tears left in you, you will know that there comes the end of a sort of quietness. You feel as if nothing will ever happen again. At any rate, that was how these two felt. Hours and hours seemed to go by in this dead calm, and they hardly noticed that they were getting colder and colder. But at last, Lucy noticed two other things. One was that the sky on the east of the hill was a little less dark than it had been an hour ago. The other day was so tiny. Movement was going on the grass at her feet. At first, she took no interest in it. What did it matter? Nothing mattered now. But at last, she saw that whatever it was had begun to move up the upright stones of the stone table. And now, whatever they were moving across Aslan's body. She peered closely. They were little gray things. "Oh," said Susan from the other side of the table. "How beastly nicely. These horrid little mice are crawling all over him. Go away, you little beasts. And she raised her hand to frighten them away. Wait, said Lucy, who had been looking at them more closely. Can you see what they're doing? Both girls bent down and stared. I do believe, said Susan. But how weird. They're nibbling at the cords. That's what I thought, said Lucy. I think they're friendly mice. Poor little things. They don't realize he's dead. They think it'll do some good untying him. It was quite definitely lighter by now. Each of the girls noticed for the first time the white face of the other. They could see the mice nibbling away, dozens and dozens, even hundreds of little field mice. And at last, one by one, the ropes were all gnawed through. The sky in the east was whitish by now, and the stars were getting fainter, all except one, very big one, low down on the eastern horizon. They felt colder when they had been up all night. The mice crept away again. The girls cleared away the remains of the gnawed ropes. Aslan looked more like himself without them now. Every moment his dead face looked nobler as the light grew and they could see it better, kind of like brave. In the wood behind them, a bird gave a chuckling sound. It had still been so still for hours and hours that it startled them. Then another bird answered it. Soon there were birds singing all over the place. It was quite definitely early morning now late and cold. I'm so cold, said Susan. So am I. Let's walk back a little bit. They walked to the eastern edge of the hill and looked down. The one big star had almost disappeared. The country looked dark gray, but beyond, at the very end of the world, the sea showed pale. The sky began to turn red. They walked to and fro from time to time. Then they could count between the dead Aslan and the eastern ridge, trying to keep warm. And oh, how tired their legs felt. Then at last, they stood for a moment looking out towards the sea and Car Paravel, which they could now just make out. The red turned to gold along the line where the sea and the sky met. And very slowly up, they came the edge of the sun. And at that moment, they heard from behind them a loud noise, a great cracking, deafening noise, as if a giant had broken a giant's plate. What's that? Said Lucy, clutching Susan's arm. I'm afraid to turn around, said Susan. Something awful is happening. They're doing something worse to him, said Lucy. Come on. And she turned, pulling Susan round with her. The rising of the sun had made everything look so different. All the colors and shadows were changed. But for a moment, they didn't see the important thing. Then they did. The stone table was broken into two pieces by a giant crack that ran down from end to end. And there was no Aslan. Oh, cried the two girls, rushing back to the table. Oh, it's too bad. They might have left his body alone, sobbed Lucy. Who's done it? Who does it mean? Is it more magic? Cried Susan. Yes, said a great voice from their backs. It is more magic. They looked around. There, shining in the sunrise, larger than they had seen him before, shaking his mane, for it apparently had grown back, stood Aslan himself. Oh, Aslan, cried both the children, staring up at him, almost as much frightened as they were glad. Aren't you dead then, dear Aslan? Said Lucy. Not now, said Aslan. You're not asked Susan in a shaking voice. She couldn't bring herself to asking if he was a ghost. Aslan stooped his golden head and licked her forehead. The warmth of his breath and a rich sort of smell that seemed to hang about her hair came all over her. Do I look like a ghost? He said. Oh, you're real. Oh, Aslan, cried Lucy, and both girls flung themselves upon him and covered him with kisses. But what does it mean? Asked Susan, when they were somewhat calmer. It means, said Aslan, that though the witch knew the deep magic, there is a magic deeper still, which she did not know. Her knowledge goes back only to the dawn of time, but if she could have looked a little further back into the stillness and the darkness before time dawned, she would have read there was a different incantation. She would have known that when a willing victim who had committed no treachery, was killed in a traitor's stead. Instead, the table would crack and death itself would start working backwards. And now, oh yes, now, said Lucy, jumping up and clapping her hands. Oh, children, said the lion, I feel my strength coming back to me. Oh, children, catch me if you can. He stood for a second, his eyes very bright, his limbs quivering, lashing himself with his tail. Then he made a leap high over their heads and landed on the other side of the table. Laughing, though she didn't know why Lucy scrambled over it to reach him, Aslan leaped again. A mad chase began. Round and round the hilltop he led them, now hopelessly out of their reach, now letting them almost catch his tail, now diving between them, now tossing them in the air with his huge and beautifully velveted paws and catching them again, and now stopping unexpectedly, so that all three of them rolled over together in a happy, laughing heap of fur in arms and legs. It was such a romp that as no one has ever had expected Narnia, and whether it was more like playing with a thunderstorm or playing with a kitten, Lucy could never make up her mind. And the funny thing was that when all three finally lay together panting in the sun, the girls no longer felt in the least tired or hungry. And now, said Aslan, to business. I feel I'm going to roar. You'd better put your fingers in your ears. And they did. And Aslan stood up, and when he opened his mouth to roar, his face became so terrible that they did not dare look at it. And they saw the trees in front of them bend before the blast of his roaring as grass bends in a meadow before the wind. Then he said, we have a long journey to go. You must ride on me. And he crouched down, and the children climbed onto his warm golden back, and Susan sat first, holding on tightly to his mane, and Lucy sat behind, holding tightly on to Susan. And with a great heave, he rose underneath them, and then shot off faster than any horse could go, downhill into the thick of the forest. That ride was perhaps the most wonderful thing that happened to them in Narnia. Have you ever had a gallop on a horse? Think of that. And then take away the heavy noise of the hoofs and jingle in the harness. And imagine instead noiseless padding of great paws. Then imagine instead of the black or gray or chestnut back of a horse, the soft roughness of golden fur and the mane flying back in the wind. And then imagine you are going about twice as fast as the fastest racing horse. And this is a mount that doesn't need to be guided and never grows tired. He rushes on and on and on, never missing his footing, never hasting, threading his way with perfect skill between tree trunks, jumping over bush and briar, in the smaller streams, wading the larger swimming the largest of all. And you're riding, not on a road, nor in a park, nor even the downs, but right across Narnia in spring, down solemn avenues of beech and across sunny glades of oaks through wild orchards of snow-white cherry trees, past roaring waterfalls and mossy rocks, and echoing caverns, up windy slopes, across the bushes and across the shoulders of heathery mountains, and along giddy ridges, down, 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 and again, into wildflowers and out into acres of blue flowers. It was nearly midday when they found themselves looking down a steep hillside at a castle. A little toy castle, it looked from where they had stood, which seemed to be all pointed towers. But the line was rushing down at each speed that it grew larger every moment. And before they had time to ask themselves what it was, they were already on a level with it. And now it no longer looked like a toy castle, but rose frowning in front of them. No face looked over the battlements, and the gates were fast shut. And Aslan, not at all slacking his pace, rushed straight as a bullet towards it. "The witch is home!" he cried. "Now, children, hold tight." Next moment, the whole world seemed to turn upside down, and the children felt as if they had left their insides behind them, for the lion had gathered himself together for a greater leap than any had yet made, and jumped, or you may call it flying rather than jumping, right over the castle wall. The two girls, breathless but unhurt, found themselves tumbling off his back in the middle of a wide stone courtyard full of statues. What do you think's gonna happen? So they went to Car Paravel, where the witch lives, right? And there's a bunch of statues. And do you remember why the statues? It's because the witch made the statues, right? They were people and she made them statues. So what do you think he's going to do? What do you think he's going to do? I don't know. But Aslan's alive. That's so exciting, right? And wow, I don't know what's going to happen next. But I do know we're getting close to the end of the book. And I'm sure the next chapter is going to be even more exciting than this one. Okay, guys. Well, we will see you next week. Say bye. Bye-bye.